I stood alone in the kitchen of our new downsized home, meticulously arranging an assortment of hors d'oeuvres on a polished silver platter. The laughter drifting in from the living room was unmistakable, as Emily, my wife, entertained our guests with yet another one of her captivating stories. Emily had always possessed a magnetic personality, one that effortlessly drew people to her like moths to a flame. For years, she had been the heartbeat of every gathering, her vibrant energy lighting up the room in a way that made others feel both welcome and engaged. As I carefully placed the final sprigs of parsley on the platter, I took a moment to soak in the sounds of our guests' laughter, mingled with Emily's melodic voice. It had been a few months since Emily and I moved into this smaller, more manageable home. The decision to downsize had been driven largely by her recent retirement after nearly 3 decades in the education system, a profession she had approached with unwavering passion. The adjustment to this new life had been more challenging than either of us anticipated. Our old home, filled with memories of our children growing up, of countless holidays and milestones, had been difficult to leave behind. This new place, while cozy, still felt like a stranger to me, with its unfamiliar corners and walls that had yet to witness the warmth of a well-lived life. Carrying the platter into the living room, I noticed Mike and Lisa, our closest friends, comfortably settled on the new, modern sofa Emily had insisted on purchasing. Mike, my best friend since our college days at Stanford, raised his glass in greeting. "There he is," he called out, a grin spreading across his face. "We thought you might have gotten lost in that fancy new kitchen of yours, Rick." I chuckled, setting the platter down on the coffee table. "Just making sure everything's perfect, you know how I am," I replied, trying to mask the slight unease I felt whenever I hosted gatherings these days. The truth was, these small get-togethers were one of the few remnants of our old life that I still clung to. They were a reminder of simpler times when everything seemed certain and secure. Emily, hearing my comment, rolled her eyes playfully, her voice dripping with affectionate sarcasm. "Rick here spent a solid hour rearranging the throw pillows before you all arrived." Her words elicited a round of laughter from the room, and I couldn't help but smile, though the warmth of the moment was tinged with an underlying tension I couldn't quite place. As the evening progressed, I watched as everyone fell into easy conversation, our years of friendship making the atmosphere light and familiar. Mike entertained us with tales of his latest entrepreneurial endeavor, a tech startup that was already making waves in the industry. Lisa, ever the proud mother, beamed as she shared their daughter's recent achievements at college. Her acceptance into a prestigious law internship had been a source of pride for both of them. Emily, never one to be left out, recounted amusing stories from her final year of teaching, her eyes sparkling with the same mischievous glint that had always been her trademark. It was during one of Mike's animated stories, as he regaled us with the ups and downs of startup life, that I first noticed it. Emily, seated on the arm of the sofa, leaned in closer to Mike, her hand resting lightly on his forearm as she laughed a bit too enthusiastically at his joke. At first I shrugged it off, attributing her touch to her naturally affectionate demeanor. Emily had always been warm, quick to hug, to pat a shoulder, or offer a reassuring touch. It was one of the qualities that had drawn me to her all those years ago. But as the night wore on, a gnawing unease began to take root in my chest. It wasn't just the way Emily touched Mike that caught my attention, but the subtle shifts in her body language. The way she seemed to gravitate toward him, angling her body slightly in his direction, even when engaged in conversation with others. Her laughter at his jokes seemed a touch too eager, her smiles lingering just a fraction too long. I tried to shake off the growing feeling of unease, telling myself I was being paranoid. This was Emily, after all, my wife of 30 years, the woman who had shared my dreams, my fears, and my triumphs. But then it happened. As Lisa excused herself to use the restroom, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart skip a beat. Emily leaned in close to Mike, whispering something in his ear. Her fingers, delicate and graceful, brushed against his hand, the touch light as a feather, but deliberate and unmistakable. And then there was Mike, my best friend, the man I had trusted with my deepest confidences, smiling that subtle, knowing smile I had seen countless times before. Only this time, it wasn't directed at me. In that fleeting moment, it felt as if the ground beneath me had shifted, leaving me standing on the edge of an abyss. The laughter and chatter around me faded into a distant hum as I stared at them, my mind struggling to process what my eyes were telling me. This couldn't be happening. Not Emily, not Mike. I fought to maintain my composure, to keep the mask of the gracious host firmly in place, but inside I was a storm of conflicting emotions: confusion, anger, betrayal, and a deep, overwhelming sadness. Somehow, I managed to get through the rest of the evening on autopilot, plastering on a smile and going through the motions of being the perfect host. But beneath the surface, I was seething, barely holding myself together as a tempest of emotions threatened to break free. As the night drew to a close, I watched as Emily hugged Mike goodbye, her hand lingering on his back for just a second too long. Lisa, blissfully unaware of the turmoil brewing inside me, kissed me on the cheek and thanked us for a lovely evening. I nodded, unable to form words, my eyes fixed on Emily's face as she waved them off. The moment the door closed behind them, something inside me snapped. The carefully constructed facade of the loving, gracious husband crumbled, replaced by a cold, hard anger that was as foreign to me as the empty house we now lived in. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice low but charged with emotion. Emily turned to me, her expression one of practiced innocence, as if she had been preparing for this confrontation her entire life. "What was what, darling?" she asked, her voice smooth and calm, as if she genuinely had no idea what I was talking about. "Don't play dumb with me, Emily," I shot back, my voice rising as the anger bubbled to the surface. "I saw you with Mike, the touching, the whispering. What's going on?" For a moment I thought she might deny it, might try to explain it away with one of her usual excuses. But then something in her expression shifted, and the mask of the devoted wife slipped, revealing a cold, calculating woman I barely recognized. "You really think I've only been with you all these years?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain, each word like a dagger to my heart. The words hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter for support as my world shattered around me. "What are you saying?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. Emily laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Rick, sweet, naive Rick. Did you really think a woman like me could be satisfied with just one man?" She gestured around our new, smaller home with a look of disgust, as if the life we had built together was nothing more than a prison she had been forced to endure. "Mike's not the first," she continued, her tone matter-of-fact, as if discussing something as mundane as the weather. "And he certainly won't be the last. I've had affairs for years, darling. It was the only way to fill the void in this sham of a marriage." I stood there, frozen, as Emily laid bare the full extent of her betrayal. Each word was like a dagger twisting in my gut, tearing apart everything I thought I knew about the woman I had loved for so long. The life we had built together, the memories we had shared. It had all been a lie. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice breaking under the weight of the revelation. "Why stay with me if you were so unhappy?" Emily's lips curled into a cruel smirk, her eyes cold and unfeeling. "Convenience, darling. You provided stability, respectability. But passion, excitement, I had to look elsewhere for that." With that final, devastating blow, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me alone in the kitchen, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty house like the closing of a coffin lid. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold, unforgiving tile of the kitchen island. The house, which had felt so warm and full of life just hours ago, now seemed cavernous and empty, its walls closing in around me. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I sat there, my mind racing, trying to make sense of how my entire world had crumbled in a single night. But as the shock began to wear off, something else took its place, a cold, hard determination. Emily might think she had won, that she could discard me like yesterday's trash, but she had no idea what I was capable of. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I pulled myself to my feet, a plan already forming in my mind. Emily had made a grave mistake in underestimating me, and I was going to make damn sure she regretted it. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from Lisa in a quiet cafe, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. The events of the previous night played on a loop in my head, each replay stoking the fire of anger and betrayal that burned in my chest. Lisa, sensing something was wrong, looked at me with concern, her usually cheerful face marred by worry lines. "Rick, what's going on? Your message sounded urgent." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "Lisa, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. She nodded, her expression growing serious. Of course, Rick. What is it? Have you noticed anything strange between Mike and Emily? The flash of pain that crossed Lisa's face told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her wedding ring, a nervous habit I had noticed before. I was hoping I was imagining things, she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. My heart sank as I realized just how deep the deception ran. So you've seen it too? Lisa nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a while now. I didn't want to believe it at first, but she trailed off, then seemed to steel herself. Rick, there's more. It's not just Mike. I felt my stomach lurch as I braced myself for what she was about to reveal. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely audible. Emily. She's been seen around town with other men, frequently. Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper now, as if speaking the words aloud would make them all the more real. There's one in particular, James Parker. He owns that new nightclub downtown. They've been spending a lot of time together. The name hit me like a sledgehammer. James Parker. I'd heard of him. A flashy newcomer to our town, known for his extravagant lifestyle and questionable business practices. The thought of Emily with someone like that made my blood boil. How long? I managed to ask through gritted teeth, the rage building inside me like a storm. Lisa shook her head, her voice filled with sorrow. I'm not sure. But Rick, I think it's serious. There have been rumors that Emily is planning to leave you for him, for a more exciting life. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white as I fought to keep my emotions in check. All those late nights Emily had claimed were for school functions, the mysterious phone calls, the unexplained expenses. It all made a sickening kind of sense now. I'm so sorry, Rick, Lisa said, reaching out to touch my hand. I should have said something sooner. I didn't want to believe it either. I nodded, unable to form words. The anger that had been simmering since last night was now a raging inferno, consuming everything in its path. Emily hadn't just betrayed me with Mike. She'd made a fool of me in front of the entire town. Thank you for telling me, Lisa, I finally managed, my voice thick with emotion. I know this couldn't have been easy for you either. She gave me a sad, sympathetic smile. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. I stood up, my mind already racing with possibilities, a plan beginning to take shape in the back of my mind. I'm going to find out exactly what's going on, and then I'm going to make sure Emily and her new friends get exactly what they deserve. As I left the cafe, I knew my next stop. It was time to pay James Parker a visit. If Emily thought she could trade in our life for an exciting fling with a nightclub owner, she had another thing coming. I found James at his club, the Velvet Lounge, a garish, neon-lit establishment that screamed new money and questionable taste. The moment I walked in, I was assaulted by the pounding bass of the music, the flashing lights, and the throngs of people dancing as if their lives depended on it. The place reeked of desperation, a desperate need to be seen, to be important, to matter, if only for a few fleeting hours. James was exactly as I'd imagined, tall, tan, with a smile that was all white teeth and no warmth. He exuded a kind of arrogance that only comes from someone who believes they are untouchable, someone who thinks they can get away with anything. Mr. Greenwood, he drawled, eyeing me with barely concealed amusement as I approached. To what do I owe the pleasure? I wasted no time with pleasantries. I know about you and my wife Parker, I said, my voice cold and steady. I want to hear it from you. For a moment, surprise flashed across his face, quickly replaced by a smug grin. Well, well, looks like the cat's out of the bag. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, the picture of arrogance. What can I say? Emily is a beautiful woman. She deserves someone who can appreciate her fully. I felt my fists clench at my sides, the urge to punch that smug grin off his face almost overwhelming. And you think that's you? I asked, my voice dripping with contempt. James laughed, the sound grating on my nerves. Oh, I know it is. Face it, old man. Emily's been bored for years. I'm just giving her what she's been missing. The casual cruelty of his words, the dismissive way he spoke about my marriage, made something snap inside me. But I held myself in check, knowing that losing control now would only play into their hands. You have no idea what you're dealing with, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Either of you. James's smirk faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, but he quickly recovered, waving a dismissive hand. Save the threats, Greenwood. It's over. Emily's made her choice. Why don't you do yourself a favor and bow out gracefully? I stared at him for a long moment, memorizing every detail of his smug face, every line and crease that would haunt my dreams for nights to come. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the club. As I stepped into the harsh sunlight outside, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. James and Emily thought they had won, that they could discard me like an outdated appliance. But they had no idea what I was capable of. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Frederick Walker, a private investigator I'd worked with in the past. If anyone could help me uncover the full extent of Emily's betrayal, it was him. As I waited for Frederick to answer, I felt a smile spread across my face. Emily and James had made a grave mistake in underestimating me, and I was going to make damn sure they regretted it. Frederick answered on the third ring. Walker speaking. Frederick, it's Rick Greenwood. I need your help. It's urgent. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that spoke volumes. I'm listening. As I began to explain the situation, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. This was about justice, about making sure that those who thought they could play with people's lives faced the consequences of their actions. Emily might have thought she was trading up for a more exciting life, but she was about to learn a harsh lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one you've dismissed as harmless. As I hung up with Frederick, I turned back toward home. It was time to put on the performance of my life. Emily wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that I was a far more formidable opponent than she'd ever imagined. I walked through the front door, my face a mask of oblivious contentment. Emily was in the living room, lounging on the sofa with a glass of wine, her face relaxed and peaceful, as if she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up as I entered, a flicker of surprise crossing her face at my cheerful demeanor. Hello, darling, I said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. Beautiful day, isn't it? Emily eyed me warily, clearly thrown by my apparent good mood after last night's confrontation. Rick, about last night, she began, her voice hesitant. I waved a hand dismissively. Water under the bridge, my dear. I was tired, overreacting. You know how I get sometimes. The relief on her face was palpable, quickly replaced by a calculating look. Of course, darling, I'm glad you understand. I smiled, the expression not quite reaching my eyes. In fact, I've been thinking we should take a trip, just the two of us, rekindle the romance, so to speak. Emily's eyes lit up, no doubt seeing an opportunity to further her plans. That sounds wonderful, Rick. Where were you thinking? Oh, I'll leave that up to you, dear. You always were better at planning these things. As Emily launched into a discussion of potential destinations, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. She thought she had me fooled, thought she was the one in control. But little did she know, the trap was already closing around her. I excused myself to make a phone call, ostensibly to check on some business matters. In reality, I was touching base with Frederick, setting our plan in motion. Everything's in place, Frederick assured me. We've got eyes and ears on both of them. If they so much as sneeze, we'll know about it. Excellent, I replied, keeping my voice low. Keep me updated on everything. And Frederick, no matter what you uncover, don't move without my say-so. I want to be the one to spring the trap. As I hung up, I heard Emily calling me from the living room. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the performance ahead. It was time to play the role of the doting, oblivious husband to perfection. Coming, dear, I called back, a smile in my voice that didn't reach my eyes. Emily had no idea what was coming, and by the time she realized, it would be far too late. I stood in our bedroom that evening, watching as Emily primped in front of the mirror. Her reflection smiled back at me, unaware of the storm brewing behind my carefully constructed mask of affection. I approached her, wrapping my arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck. Darling, I murmured, I've been thinking. You know that old jewelry set from my grandmother? Emily's eyes lit up with interest. The Victorian one? What about it? I smiled, playing the role of the naive, trusting husband to perfection. Well, I was thinking of selling it. There's a new business venture I've been eyeing, and it could be just the investment we need. Her face was a study in barely concealed excitement. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, no doubt already plotting how she could use this unexpected windfall to her advantage. "That's a wonderful idea, Rick," she cooed, turning in my arms to face me. "You know, I've always thought that set was a bit outdated for our tastes." I nodded, suppressing the urge to call her out on her transparent greed. "I thought you'd approve. I'll arrange for an appraisal next week." As Emily launched into a discussion about potential buyers, I allowed my mind to wander to the real plan taking shape. Frederick had already been informed of this latest development. Even now, he was setting up the necessary surveillance equipment in our home, ready to capture every damning word Emily and her lover might utter. The next few days were a delicate dance of deception. I played my part flawlessly, arranging for the jewelry appraisal with a show of enthusiasm that would have fooled anyone who didn't know better. Emily, for her part, could barely contain her eagerness, no doubt already imagining how she would spend my family's legacy. It was on a Tuesday evening when everything came to a head. I had informed Emily that I would be out late at a business dinner, giving her the perfect opportunity to invite James over. As I pretended to leave, I caught a glimpse of her already reaching for her phone, a sly smile playing on her lips. I drove around the block, then quietly re-entered the house through the back door. Frederick was waiting for me in the study, surrounded by an array of sophisticated surveillance equipment. "Everything's in place," he whispered, handing me a pair of headphones. "They're in the living room now." I slipped on the headphones, my jaw clenching as Emily and James's voices filled my ears. "Can you believe it?" Emily was saying, her voice dripping with excitement. "The old fool is practically handing us a fortune. Once we sell that jewelry, we'll have everything we need to start our new life together." James's low chuckle made my blood boil. "I always knew you were clever, baby. But this is masterful. Poor Rick won't know what hit him. He never does." "Exactly," Emily replied, her tone dismissive. "He's so caught up in his own little world, he can't see what's right in front of him. It's almost too easy." I listened for over an hour as they gleefully discussed their plans, mocking my perceived naivety and plotting how they would use my money to fund their lavish lifestyle. With each passing minute, my resolve hardened. They thought they were so clever, but they had no idea of the trap that was closing around them. As their conversation wound down, I nodded to Frederick. "We've got what we need. Time to set the final stage." The next morning, I informed Emily that I would be leaving town for a few days on business. Her attempts to hide her glee were almost comical. "Oh, darling, are you sure you have to go?" she asked, her concern so obviously feigned it was insulting. I kissed her cheek, playing along one last time. "I'm afraid so, my dear. But don't worry, I'll be back before you know it." As I drove away from the house, I called Frederick. "It's time. Are you ready?" "Everything's set," he confirmed. "The bank's been notified. The moment they try to access the accounts, we'll know." I smiled. "Excellent. Let's see how they like it when the tables are turned." I checked into a hotel on the outskirts of town, close enough to react quickly when the time came. For 2 days I waited, my nerves on edge, knowing that at any moment, Emily and James would make their move. The call came on the 3rd day. "They're at the bank," Frederick reported, "and they've just gotten one hell of a surprise." I was already moving, grabbing my coat and heading for the door. "I'm on my way. Make sure the police are ready." The drive back to town seemed to take an eternity, though in reality, it was less than an hour. As I pulled up to our house, I saw Emily's car in the driveway, along with James's ostentatious sports car. Perfect. I strode into the house, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and anticipation. I found them in the living room, Emily pacing frantically while James sat on the couch, his head in his hands. "Well, well," I said, my voice cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. "Having some trouble accessing our accounts, dear." Emily whirled to face me, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Rick, we were just—" "Save it," I snapped, my facade of the loving husband finally dropping away. "I know everything. Your affairs, your plans to steal my money, all of it." James stood up, his face a mask of anger and desperation. "Now listen here, old man." But I was done listening. I pulled out my phone and played the recording Frederick had made, watching with satisfaction as the color drained from their faces. "I've filed for divorce," I informed them, my voice cold and hard. "All our joint assets are frozen. And as for you," I turned to James, "I hope you're ready for a lengthy legal battle. Attempted theft. Fraud. The list goes on. James's bravado crumbled. He lunged towards me, his fist raised. "You son of a—" But before he could reach me, the front door burst open. 2 police officers strode in, their faces grim. "Perfect timing, gentlemen," I said, nodding to them. "I believe you'll find everything you need to arrest these 2 right here." As the officers read Emily and James their rights, I stood back, watching with a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. Emily's tearful pleas for forgiveness fell on deaf ears. James's threats and bluster were equally ineffective. As they were led away in handcuffs, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over yet. There would be legal battles ahead, no doubt. But for now, justice had been served. I turned to Frederick, who had appeared silently in the doorway. "Thank you," I said simply. "I couldn't have done this without you." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It was my pleasure, Rick. Some people need to learn that their actions have consequences." As I watched the police cars drive away, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Emily and James had thought they could play me for a fool, that they could steal my money and my dignity without consequence. But they had underestimated me, and now they would pay the price. I turned back to the house, my house, now free from Emily's toxic presence. There was still work to be done, a life to rebuild. But for the first time in months, I felt a sense of hope. They had tried to break me, but instead, they had only made me stronger. And as I stepped back inside, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head-on. Emily and James's reign of deceit was over. Now, it was time for me to reclaim my life on my own terms. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from Sheila Dawson, the sharp-eyed attorney I had hired to handle my divorce and the legal proceedings against Emily and James. Her office was a testament to her success. Sleek lines and modern art, with a view of the city skyline that spoke of power and influence. "Well, Rick," she said, leaning back in her chair, "I have to say, you've given me quite a case to work with. The evidence you've gathered is impressive, to say the least." I nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction. I wanted to make sure there was no room for doubt. Emily and James need to face the full consequences of their actions. Sheila's lips curved into a predatory smile. "Oh, they will. With the recordings you've provided, along with the financial documents and witness statements, we have more than enough to push for a quick divorce and pursue criminal charges." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "I recommend we file for an immediate divorce on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. We'll push for a complete separation of assets, with you retaining everything, given Emily's attempts at theft." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "And the criminal charges? We'll file those concurrently," Sheila replied. "Attempted theft, fraud, conspiracy, the list goes on. I'd also suggest we file for a restraining order against James, given his violent tendencies. It's better to be safe than sorry." As Sheila laid out her aggressive legal strategy, I felt a surge of gratitude. This was exactly what I needed. Someone who wouldn't pull any punches, who would fight as hard as I was willing to. "There's one more thing," I said as she finished outlining her plan. "I want to make sure this is as public as possible. Emily and James don't get to slink away in the shadows. I want everyone to know exactly what they've done." Sheila's grin widened. "Oh, I think we can arrange that. By the time we're done, their reputations will be in tatters. They'll be social pariahs." As I left Sheila's office, my mind was already racing with the next steps. The legal wheels were in motion, but I knew Emily wouldn't go down without a fight, and I was ready for whatever she might throw my way. The legal battle was about to begin. I stood at the back of the packed courtroom, my face a mask of cold determination. The air was thick with tension and morbid curiosity, as spectators craned their necks, eager to witness the downfall of Emily and James. I felt nothing but contempt for the vultures who had come to feast on the sordid details of my personal tragedy. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Gloria Reese, laid out the case against Emily and James with surgical precision. Each piece of evidence Frederick and I had meticulously gathered was presented like a dagger, cutting through their web of lies. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Gloria began, her voice carrying easily through the hushed courtroom, "what you will hear today is a tale of betrayal, greed, and callous disregard for the sanctity of marriage and the law." I watched as she played the recordings Frederick had made, Emily and James's voices filling the room with their cruel mockery and scheming. The jury's faces tightened with disgust as they listened to my wife and her lover plot to steal my money and destroy my life. When it was my turn to take the stand, I walked to the witness box with my head held high. I wouldn't give Emily the satisfaction of seeing me broken. "Mr. Greenwood," Gloria said, "please tell the court about your marriage to the defendant, Emily Greenwood." I looked directly at Emily as I spoke, my voice steady and cold. For 30 years, I believed I was in a loving, committed relationship. I provided for our family, supported Emily's career, and thought we were building a life together. It wasn't until recently that I discovered it had all been a lie. I recounted the night of the dinner party, the growing suspicions, and the devastating moment when Emily had coldly admitted to her infidelity. With each word, I could see Emily shrinking in her seat, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "And what did you discover about the defendant's financial activities, Mr. Greenwood?" Gloria asked. "I learned that Emily had been systematically draining our joint accounts," I replied, my anger tightly controlled. "She and Mr. Parker had been plotting to steal my family heirlooms and liquidate our assets. They planned to leave me with nothing. Emily's lawyer, a slick-haired man named Richard Dalton, tried to spin a tale of a neglectful husband and a lonely wife driven to desperation, but his arguments fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dalton pleaded, "my client was trapped in a loveless marriage, starved for affection and understanding. Can we truly condemn her for seeking happiness elsewhere?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Emily? The victim? The woman who had coldly plotted my ruin, who had smirked as she revealed her betrayal? It was laughable. James's defense was equally pathetic. His lawyer tried to paint him as a lovesick fool manipulated by Emily's charms, but the recordings told a different story, revealing James's active participation in the scheme to defraud me. As the trial progressed, I watched Emily's carefully cultivated image disintegrate. The composed, respected former educator was revealed for what she truly was, a conniving, greedy woman who had used me for decades. The jury's deliberation was mercifully short. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces were grim with resolve. The foreman stood, his voice ringing out clearly. "On the charge of attempted grand larceny, we find the defendants, Emily Greenwood and James Parker, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendants guilty." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. I remained stoic, even as a weight lifted from my shoulders. Justice, cold and impartial, had been served. The judge's voice cut through the murmur of the spectators. "Emily Greenwood, James Parker, please rise for sentencing." They stood, Emily pale and shaking, James's arrogance finally shattered. "For your crimes, which demonstrate a callous disregard for the bonds of marriage and the law, I hereby sentence you both to 8 years in federal prison," the judge declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. As Emily and James were led away in handcuffs, I felt no joy, no sense of triumph, only a satisfaction that their reign of deceit was finally over. I left the courthouse, ignoring the flashing cameras and shouted questions from reporters. My part in this sordid drama was done. It was time to reclaim my life. The house seemed cavernous and empty as I stepped through the front door. Every corner held memories of the life I'd shared with Emily, now tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. I stood in the foyer for a long moment, letting the weight of everything that had happened settle over me. Then, with a determined set to my jaw, I got to work. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into renovating the house, tearing out anything that reminded me of Emily and replacing it with pieces that spoke to my own tastes and interests. The master bedroom, once a shrine to Emily's expensive tastes, was gutted. I replaced the gaudy, oversized bed with a simpler, more elegant piece. The walls, once covered in floral wallpaper that Emily had insisted on, were now a soothing shade of blue. As I worked, I found myself thinking of Lisa more and more. We had been meeting for coffee regularly since the trial, bonding over our shared experiences of betrayal. Unlike Emily, Lisa was genuine, her warmth and empathy a balm to my battered spirit. One afternoon, as we sat in a quiet cafe, Lisa hesitantly broached the subject of her own divorce. "I filed the papers," she said, her voice a mixture of sadness and relief. "After what Mike did, there's just no going back." I reached out, covering her hand with mine. "You're doing the right thing, Lisa. You deserve better than a man who would betray you like that." She looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. So do you, Rick. I'm so sorry for what Emily did to you. In that moment, something shifted between us. The comfort of friendship deepened into something more, a spark of possibility that neither of us had expected. As the weeks turned into months, Lisa and I grew closer. We took long walks in the park, discussing our hopes and dreams for the future. I found myself opening up to her in ways I never had with Emily, sharing my passion for history and antiques. It was during one of these conversations that the idea for the antique shop was born. You know so much about these pieces, Lisa said, admiring a Victorian-era pocket watch I'd shown her. Have you ever thought about turning it into a business? The idea took root, growing stronger with each passing day. I began to research locations, sourcing inventory, and all the intricacies of running a small business. Lisa was there every step of the way, offering encouragement and practical advice. When I finally found the perfect location, a charming storefront in the heart of the historic district, Lisa was the first person I called. "It's perfect, Rick," she said as we stood in the empty shop, her eyes alight with excitement. "I can already see how beautiful it's going to be." I turned to her, suddenly nervous. "Lisa," I was wondering, "would you consider being a part of this? Not just as a supporter, but as a partner in the business?" Her face lit up with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Rick, I would love to. Nothing would make me happier than building this dream with you." As we worked to bring the antique shop to life, I felt a sense of purpose and joy that had been missing from my life for far too long. Lisa's presence, her unwavering support and genuine affection, filled a void I hadn't even realized was there. The day we opened Timeless Treasures, I stood beside Lisa, watching as customers browsed our carefully curated collection. The shop was everything I dreamed it would be. Elegant, inviting, a testament to the beauty and craftsmanship of bygone eras. But even as I reveled in this new chapter of my life, the past wasn't quite done with me yet. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, the unfamiliar handwriting piquing my curiosity. As I read the contents, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Dear Mr. Greenwood, my name is Arnold Warner. You don't know me, but I have information regarding James Parker that I believe you need to hear. If you're willing to meet, I can provide evidence that may change your perspective on recent events. Sincerely, Arnold Warner." I stared at the letter, my mind racing. What could this man possibly know that would change anything? Hadn't the trial revealed every sordid detail of Emily and James's betrayal? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet Warner at a neutral location, a quiet park on the outskirts of town. As I approached the designated bench, I saw a nervous-looking man in his late 40s, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "Mr. Greenwood?" he asked as I sat down. When I nodded, he continued, his voice low and urgent. "Thank you for meeting me. What I'm about to tell you, it goes beyond what you know about James Parker." Warner pulled out a thick folder, his hand shaking slightly. "James wasn't just after your wife's money. He was running a much larger scheme, targeting wealthy individuals all over the country. Emily, she was just another mark to him." I leafed through the documents Warner provided, my stomach churning. Bank statements, emails, even surveillance photos, all painting a picture of a man far more dangerous and calculating than I had realized. He was planning to flee the country, Warner explained, with millions in stolen funds. He never had any intention of staying with Emily. She was going to be left holding the bag, taking the fall for his crimes. I sat back, my mind reeling. Emily, for all her faults, had been as much a victim of James's machinations as I had been. The realization didn't erase the pain of her betrayal, but it cast our entire ordeal in a new light. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Warner looked down, shame evident in his posture. "I worked for James. I helped him set up some of these schemes. But when I realized how far he was willing to go, how many lives he was destroying, I couldn't be a part of it anymore. This is my way of trying to make things right." I thanked Warner for the information, watching as he hurried away, still glancing nervously over his shoulder. As I sat there, the weight of this new knowledge settling over me, I realized I had a decision to make. Part of me wanted to use this information to further destroy Emily, to ensure she never saw the light of day again. But another part, a part I thought had died with my marriage, felt a twinge of pity for the woman who had once been my wife. In the end, I decided to take the middle path. I wouldn't actively use this information against Emily, but neither would I go out of my way to help her. Instead, I called Frederick. "Frederick," I said when he answered, "I have some information I think you'll find interesting. I need you to look into it, see how deep this rabbit hole goes." As I relayed Warner's revelations, I could almost hear Frederick's mind working, piecing together the larger picture. "Leave it with me, Rick," he said finally. "I'll make sure this information gets to the right people." With that, I decided to close the book on this chapter of my life. I had given the information to someone who could use it effectively, but I wouldn't let it consume me. My focus now was on the future, on the life I was building with Lisa, on our thriving business, on the possibilities that lay ahead. Months passed, and timeless treasures flourished under our care. Lisa and I fell into an easy rhythm, our partnership in business evolving naturally into something deeper and more profound in our personal lives. On a crisp autumn evening, as we stood outside our shop admiring the window display we had just finished, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Lisa's hand was warm in mine, her presence a constant source of strength and joy. "Can you believe how far we've come?" she asked, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. I squeezed her hand, a smile tugging at my lips. "It's been quite a journey, but I wouldn't change a thing if it led me here with you." As we turned to head back inside, ready to face whatever challenges or joys the future might hold, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The pain of the past had forged me into someone stronger, someone capable of not just surviving betrayal, but of building something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. With Lisa by my side, I was ready to embrace this new chapter of my life, filled with hope, love, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived.